Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are settling in for a conversation that I think is going to be incredibly relevant for, well, for anyone who has ever felt that tension between their public success and their private struggles. We're opening up a file that might look familiar to many of you, the story of Naaman from the Old Testament book of 2 Kings.
It is a familiar story, you're right. It's a staple of Sunday school, I think, because it has such vivid imagery, armies, chariots, a muddy river, a miraculous healing.
Right.
But for this deep dive, we're basing our discussion on a really profound essay by Brother Woody Brahm. It's titled Naaman, the Syrian commander healed by faith and humility. And his approach isn't just to, retell the story for kids. He is treating this text as a mirror for thoughtful adult Christians.
I really appreciated the tone of the essay. It felt very pastoral. It wasn't trying to be sensational or anything. It was just warm, serious, and reflective. It invites us to slow down and really look at the dynamics of grace and pride.
Exactly. The mission here is to walk through this narrative from let's say, the marble floors of a Syrian palace all the way to the muddy banks of the Jordan River and really unpack the theological weight of it.
Because at the center of this account is a man who has everything the world tells us we should want. He has rank, respect, wealth.
Everything. But his rank can't save him from his disease. And as we'll see, his pride almost keeps him from the cure.
It's the classic tension, isn't it? Human sufficiency versus divine mercy. And as Brother Brome points out, this isn't just some Old Testament history lesson. This story is so potent that when Jesus brings it up in the New Testament, in Luke chapter 4, it actually makes his audience furious.
That's right. There is something about this story that really challenges our assumptions about who God is and, maybe more to the point, who deserves his grace. So yeah, let's get into it. We're in 2 Kings chapter 5.
Okay, so let's set the scene with the characters. Who is this man, Naaman?
Naaman is the commander of the army of Syria, or Aram. And we need to understand the geopolitical context here to really feel the weight of this. Syria wasn't a friendly neighbor to Israel.
No.
They were the dominant superpower to the north. They were the aggressors. Raids across the border were common. So Naaman isn't just a foreign dignitary. In many ways, he represents the enemy.
And the text doesn't hold back on his resume, does it? Verse 1 describes him as a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded. A man of valor.
He is at the absolute pinnacle of his career. I mean, he has the ear of the king of Syria. He has the admiration of his troops. If you were just looking at him from the outside, you would say, that is a man who has made it.
But then comes the twist. The essay calls it the paradox of Naaman.
Yes, the but. The text says he was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy.
That is a heavy but.
Oh, it changes everything. And we really need to pause on what leprosy meant in the ancient world. It wasn't just a dermatological issue.
It was a social death sentence.
It was a sentence of slow death, both physically and socially. It carried this massive stigma, fear, isolation, shame. So you have this jarring contradiction. Publicly, Naaman is a decorated hero in shining armor. Privately, under that armor, he's rotting away.
It strikes me that this is such a universal human experience. We all have our but. You can be successful in business, but your marriage is falling apart. You can be the life of the party, but you deal with crippling anxiety.
Precisely. Naaman represents the limit of human power. All his victories on the battlefield couldn't cleanse him. All his wealth couldn't buy a cure. He is powerful, yet completely and utterly helpless.
Now, there's a specific phrase in verse 1 that Brother Brome highlights in the essay, and I found it really surprising. It says, Naaman was highly regarded because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram.
It stops you in your tracks, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Aram is Israel's enemy. Why would the biblical writer credit Yahweh, the God of Israel, with giving victory to the enemy of Israel?
And this is such a crucial theological point right at the beginning. It establishes the sovereignty of God over all nations, not just Israel. We so often think of God taking sides in a very tribal way.
Our side.
Right, our side. But the text is telling us that God was ruling the battlefield even when Israel was losing. God was using Naaman, a pagan general, for his own purposes. It just reminds us that God is writing a story that is so much bigger than our national borders or our political alliances.
So God is sovereign over the geopolitical map. But he's also sovereign over the details of a single household. Because the catalyst for Naaman's healing doesn't come from a king or a general, it comes from the unlikely messenger.
This is one of the most beautiful contrasts in Scripture. The text introduces a young girl, we don't even know her name. She was a captive from Israel serving Naaman's wife.
Let's just think about her situation for a second. She's a slave. She was taken from her home by Naaman's raiding parties.
Yeah.
She has zero rank, zero status.
And honestly, if anyone had a reason to be bitter, it was her. I mean, she is washing the clothes of the man who likely destroyed her village, maybe even killed her family. You would expect her to want revenge. You'd expect her to just stay silent and let him suffer from his leprosy.
Which she doesn't.
No. In verse 3, she says to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy."
That is just a stunning display of faith and compassion.
It really is. It's an act of enemy love long before Jesus ever preached the Sermon on the Mount. And notice her theology. She is far from home, surrounded by Syrian idols, but she is absolutely confident in the power of the God of Israel. She doesn't say, well, maybe the prophet could help. She says, he would cure him.
Her faith is so simple, but it is just rock solid.
Mm-hmm.
It really highlights the difference between her spiritual standing and her social standing. Socially, she's the smallest person in the story, but spiritually, she's the giant.
Without a doubt. So Naaman listens to her, which, again, just shows how desperate he must have been taking medical advice from a captive servant girl.
Desperation opens the ears.
It really does. Naaman goes to the king of Aram, tells him what the girl said, and the king says, "Go, I will send a letter to the king of Israel."
And Naaman loads up. The essay mentions the amount of gold and silver he took. It was an absolute fortune.
We're talking millions of dollars in today's currency, plus 10 changes of clothing, which were a major sign of wealth. Naaman is operating on the world system. If you have a problem, you throw money and influence at it. He assumes he can buy this miracle.
So he arrives at the palace of the king of Israel with this letter. And we see a total contrast between the king and the servant girl.
It's a tragic comedy almost. Naaman hands the letter to the king of Israel. The letter says, "I have sent Naaman to you that you may cure him." And the king of Israel, he goes into a full-blown panic. He tears his royal robes.
What goes through his mind?
Fear, paranoia. He reads the letter and says, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? This man is trying to pick a fight with me."
So he thinks it's a political trap.
Exactly. He thinks the king of Aram is asking for the impossible as a pretext for war. Oh, you couldn't cure my general? Well, now we invade. The king of Israel sees a political threat where the little servant girl saw a spiritual opportunity.
It shows us that you can be a king in Israel and yet be completely blind to the power of God.
Totally blind. And that is where Elisha stepped in.
Right.
Yes. Elisha hears about the king's meltdown, and he says a message saying, essentially, "Why did you tear your robes? Send the man to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel."
It shifts the entire scene from royal fear to prophetic authority. And this brings us to section 2 of the outline, the biblical narrative and the test of pride.
This is the heart of the conflict. Naaman leaves the palace and he heads to Elisha's house. And we have to visualize this arrival. This isn't just a guy knocking on a door.
No, this is a motorcade.
It's a motorcade. Chariots, horses, soldiers, servants, treasure chests. He parks this massive display of Syrian glory right in front of Elisha's humble little house.
He is expecting the red carpet. He's a VIP.
He is used to being honored. He expects to be treated as such. And what happens? Elisha doesn't even come out.
He sends a messenger.
He sends an intermediary. He doesn't even bother to open the door himself.
That has to be a shock to Naaman's system.
It's a deliberate snub, but the essay argues it's a redemptive snub. Elisha isn't just being rude for the sake of being rude. He is cutting across Naaman's entire expectation of recognition. Naaman thinks his rank matters here. Elisha is showing him that before God, his rank means absolutely nothing. He is just a man in need of mercy.
And the message isn't what he expects either. It's just, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan and your flesh will be restored.
And Naaman explodes. Verse 11 says he went away angry, furious.
We really need to unpack this rage. Why is he so mad? It's a cure, isn't it?
It is, but it's not the cure he wanted. Listen to his complaint. "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me."
He wanted a show.
He wanted magic. He wanted a big ceremony that matched his dignity, a waving hand, a loud incantation that feels powerful, that feels like something a great man deserves.
But just washing in a river.
That's mundane. That's what a peasant does to get clean. It's beneath him.
And he also attacks the geography of it. He says, "Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them?"
And to be honest, he had a point about the water. The rivers of Damascus were these beautiful mountain streams fed by snowmelt. They were clear, cold, gorgeous. The Jordan River, especially in the south, is, well, it's muddy, it's brown, it's hot.
So he's basically saying, if this is just about taking a bath, I have much nicer bathtubs at home.
Right. But that is the deep dive point the essay makes. The issue wasn't the quality of the water. It wasn't about hygiene at all. It was about obedience and humility. God gave a command that made no logical sense and offered no dignity to Naaman's ego. He was asking Naaman to look foolish.
And Naaman is ready to turn his chariots around and drive all the way back to Syria, still a leper, just because his feelings are hurt. It shows how dangerous pride is. It would rather die than submit.
It blocks the blessing every time. But once again, the little people in the story save the narrative. His own servants approach him. And I just love the wisdom they show here.
They're very gentle with him. They come to him and say, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it?"
That is such a piercing question. I mean, think about it. If Elisha had said, Naaman, to be healed, you must conquer a city, or you must pay 10,000 talents of gold, or you must climb the highest mountain, Naaman would have done it instantly.
Why?
Why? Because a hard task allows you to keep your pride. You can come back and say, look at what I achieved. Look at the price I paid. You earn it. But a simple task, go wash. That requires nothing but trust. It strips you of all boasting. You can't brag about taking a bath.
That is a profound insight.
Yeah.
We often prefer a hard religion of works because it flatters us, rather than a simple gospel of grace that just requires us to be helpless.
Exactly. The servants basically say, how much more than when he tells you, wash and be cleansed?
So we reach the turning point. Naaman listens. He swallows his pride. He goes down to that muddy Jordan River.
And you have to imagine he has to undress. He has to take off the armor, the symbols of his rank, the medals. He has to expose his leprous skin to his soldiers and to the world. It is an act of total vulnerability.
And he dips. 1 time. 2 times.
And you have to wonder what he was thinking on the 3rd or 4th dip. He comes up dripping with muddy water, looking at his skin, and it's still leprous.
It wasn't a gradual cure then.
No. It required persistence and faith. Dip 5, dip 6. Still nothing. He has to trust the word of the prophet over the evidence of his own eyes.
And then, the 7th time.
He rises from the water, and the text says, his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy.
Complete restoration.
Better than before, like a child's skin. And the key takeaway here, and Brome is very clear on this in the essay, is that the river didn't heal him. The water had no magical chemical properties.
Yes.
The word of the Lord healed him. God honors the faith that obeys, even when our own understanding lags behind. Naaman suspended his logic, and he stood on God's promise.
And that physical healing leads immediately to a spiritual transformation. This brings us to section 3, the response to grace.
Naaman gets dressed and goes straight back to Elisha. But look at the difference in his whole demeanor. He's not demanding anything. He stands before the man of God, and he makes this massive theological declaration. He says, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel.
That is a conversion. He goes from being a pagan idolater to a monotheist in 1 afternoon.
It moves from a physical cure to a deep theological conviction. He realizes that the gods of Syria, Rimmon, and the rest, they're nothing. Yahweh is the only God, and his first instinct is gratitude. He begs Elisha, please accept a gift from your servant. He wants to give him the gold, the silver, everything.
But Elisha refuses. He says, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing.
Naaman urges him, but he still refuses.
Why? I mean, Elisha's a prophet. He certainly has needs. There's a school of prophets to support. Why turn down a legitimate offering?
Because the nature of grace itself is at stake. This is a critical theological point in the essay. If Elisha takes the money, it turns the healing into a transaction.
It makes it look like a payment.
Exactly. It makes it look like Naaman purchased God's favor. Elisha refuses so that Naaman understands deeply and permanently that God's mercy is a free gift. It cannot be bought.
So Naaman puts his money away. But then he makes 2 requests that, I have to admit, sound a little strange to modern ears. First, he asks for 2 mule loads of earth. Just dirt from Israel.
It does sound odd to us. Can I have some dirt to go? But it reflects the ancient worldview. In that time, people often linked deities to specific lands or territories. Naaman is returning to Syria, but he wants to worship Yahweh, so he wants to physically kneel on Yahweh's land, even while he is in Damascus.
So the idea is he'll spread this dirt out somewhere and pray on it.
Yes. It shows his commitment. He says, your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings to any god but the Lord. He wants to be as close to the God of Israel as he possibly can be.
Okay, that makes sense in context. But the second request is even more complex. We might call it the Rimmon dilemma.
This is where the story gets very practical for us today. Naaman is a high official. He serves the king of Aram, and part of his official duty is to escort the king into the temple of Rimmon, the pagan god, and to support the king physically while the king bows down.
So Naaman is basically asking, when I'm on the clock and I have to go into this idol's temple and physically bow down because I'm holding up my boss, the king, will God forgive me for that?
He's clarifying where his heart is. He's saying, my body might be bowing to do my job, but my heart is not bowing to Rimmon. My heart belongs to Yahweh. He's asking for pardon in advance for this conflict of interest.
This is such a real dilemma. It's faith in a hostile workplace.
Absolutely. He can't just quit his job, or maybe he feels he shouldn't. He has a new faith, but he has old obligations.
And what is Elisha's response? Does he give him a big lecture,
Yeah.
list of rules? Does he tell him he has to resign immediately?
No, he simply says, go in peace.
Go in peace. That feels surprisingly open-ended.
It is. Elisha doesn't give him a rule book. He doesn't micromanage his conscience. And the essay points out that Elisha trusts God to shepherd this new believer. Naaman is returning to a very difficult environment, but he's going with a new heart and the presence of God. Elisha just releases him into God's care.
That's a huge lesson for us on how we treat new believers. Sometimes we want to fix all their behavior overnight, but Elisha prioritized the heart connection with God.
But the story doesn't end on that peaceful note. We have a dark twist in section 4. We have to talk about Gehazi.
Gehazi, he's Elisha's servant. He's been watching all of this, the healing, the refusal of the payment, and he is not happy about it.
No, he is seething. He watches Naaman drive away with all that wealth still in the wagons, and he says to himself, my master was too easy on this Aramean. He let him go without accepting a thing.
There's greed there, but maybe also a little bit of prejudice. This Aramean.
I think it's probably both. He thinks we deserve that money, so he chases after Naaman's chariot, and when he catches him, he tells a lie, a completely fabricated story.
He says, oh, actually, Elisha changed his mind. 2 prophets just arrived, and they need some clothing and silver.
It's so manipulative. He uses a ministry need to cover his personal greed, and Naaman, who is just overflowing with gratitude, is thrilled to give. He says, by all means, take 2 talents. He gives him double what Gehazi even asks for.
So Gehazi takes the loot, he hides it in his house, and then he just walks back into Elisha's presence acting like nothing happened.
And here comes the confrontation. Elisha asks him, where have you been, Gehazi?
And Gehazi lies again. Your servant didn't go anywhere.
But the prophet knows. Elisha says, was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? And then he pronounces this terrifying judgment. He asks, is this the time to take money or to accept clothes?
What does he mean by that? Is this the time?
He means, we just demonstrated the free, unbuyable grace of Yahweh to a pagan nation. Is this the moment to turn it into a business transaction? Gehazi's greed completely undermined the testimony of God's grace.
And the consequence is severe.
Elisha says, Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever. And instantly, Gehazi turns white as snow with leprosy.
The leper becomes clean, and the clean man becomes a leper.
It is a total reversal. Humility opens the hands to receive grace. Greed closes the hands to grace. Gehazi tried to profit from the holy, and in the end, he lost everything.
This story is so rich with narrative, but we need to pivot to section 5 and discuss the theological significance. The essay draws a really important connection to Luke chapter 4. Why did Jesus bring up this specific story?
It's fascinating. Jesus is in his hometown of Nazareth, and the people there, they want him to perform miracles for them. You know, he's the local hero. But Jesus pushes back. He says, there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian.
And the crowd tried to kill him for saying that.
They were enraged, absolutely enraged, because Jesus was pointing out that God's grace isn't a domestic product. It's not something they owned because of their nationality.
Right.
God bypassed the entitled Israelites to save a humble enemy. It challenged their prejudice and their pride to the core.
The essay also mentions something it calls a dispensational distinction. Can you clarify that for our listeners?
Sure. It's just important to distinguish between how God worked in Israel and how he works now in the church. In the Old Testament, miracles like this were often signs to authenticate the prophet and the nation of Israel. Naaman's healing was a powerful sign of God's power.
So today, we shouldn't necessarily expect that if we have a skin disease, we need to go find a specific river to dip in.
Right. We don't look for an Israelite prophet. We come to God through Christ. But, and this is key, while the method changes, the principles remain exactly the same. God still saves by grace. He still resists the proud. He still honors humble faith.
And the nature of grace itself is consistent.
Yes, grace produces worship. Naaman didn't just walk away saying, cool, I'm healthy now. He walked away saying, I will serve no other God. True grace changes our allegiance. If we think grace is just a get-out-of-jail-free card, we haven't really understood it. It compels us to give our lives to the giver.
Okay, let's move to section 6, spiritual lessons and practical application. Brother Brome outlines several really helpful takeaways. The first one is about overturning expectations.
This is something we all need to hear. God often saves and works in ways that offend our human pride. Just like Naaman wanted a grand ceremony, we often want a salvation that recognizes our intelligence or our effort. But the gospel is like that muddy river. It requires us to admit we're helpless.
It reminds me of what the Apostle Paul says about the cross being foolishness to the world.
Exactly. It's too simple for the proud, but it is the power of God for the humble. We have to be willing to dip in God's way, not in our own way.
The second lesson is the witness of the unknown. I just love the servant girl's role in this whole story.
It's a huge encouragement for the little people. She isn't named. She had no power, no status. But her simple faithfulness moved a general, and through him, a king. God writes big stories with small names. So if you feel insignificant or if you feel stuck in a place where you have no influence, remember her. Your faithfulness right where you are can bear fruit you can't even see yet.
Then there is the faith in the workplace lesson, that Riemann dilemma.
This is so relevant for our listeners. I mean, many of you work in secular environments. You might face ethical pressures, situations where you feel compromised. Naaman's story teaches us that we can be open about our faith. Naaman confessed Yahweh, but we also have to navigate complexity with wisdom.
And the pattern seems to be confess the Lord openly, but relying on the Spirit to navigate the specific duties.
Right. And like Elisha, we need to extend grace to one another as we all try to figure out those lines. We shouldn't be too quick to judge someone else's Rimmon Temple situation.
The fourth lesson is a really stark warning: money and ministry.
The Gehazi warning. Ministry must never be done for profit. When we try to monetize the gospel or when we view people as sources of income rather than souls to be served, we are walking in the spirit of Gehazi. When grace is free, God gets all the glory.
And finally, the mission to the nations.
Naaman is a precursor to the Great Commission. He shows us that God's heart has always been for the whole world, not just one ethnic group or nation. The call is for all people everywhere to repent and believe.
And Brother Brome ends the essay with a beautiful thought about a better washing.
Yes, Naaman washed in the Jordan and was cleansed for a lifetime, but we have a better washing available to us. The New Testament speaks of the washing of regeneration. We are cleansed not by river water, but by the blood of Christ. And that doesn't just clean the skin, it cleans the conscience. It solves the problem of sin that goes so much deeper than leprosy ever could.
This has been such a rich journey through 2 Kings 5. It really is amazing how a story from thousands of years ago can speak so directly to our pride, our work, and our hearts today.
It really is a tapestry of mercy and warning. We saw Naaman transform from a proud commander to a humble worshiper. We saw Elisha protecting the purity of grace. And we saw Gehazi, who lost everything because he tried to sell it.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with the final challenge from the essay. It quotes James 4.6.
God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. I mean, that is the summary of the whole story. If God has set a clear word before you, maybe a command to forgive or to repent or to serve, even if it cuts across your pride, don't turn away angry like Naaman almost did.
Don't look for a harder task that makes you look good.
No. Go down to the river of his promise, trust him, dip your pride in his command.
We're going to close by reading the moment of Naaman's healing and his confession, followed by a simple blessing for you.
This is from 2 Kings 5, verses 14 and 15. So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel."
And now, a blessing for you.
May you find the peace that Naaman found, not by being great, but by being humble. May you have the courage to trust God's simple word, and may you know deep in your soul that his grace is sufficient for you. Go in peace.